Hi, I'm Mary Greendale, and welcome to our annual series of interviews of candidates for local offices. The town election is May 24th. We have contests for Select Board, Finance Committee, Planning Board, and School Committee. I am interviewing all these candidates. I have prepared questions specific to each board or committee. Each candidate will respond to the same questions for that office. This allows voters the chance to compare the candidates' approaches and thinking according to the issue. These videos will run a maximum of 25 minutes and will be available on HCAT's website, on HCAT's YouTube channel, on our Facebook page. So let's get started. So now we're going to introduce Dawn Neborski, who is a candidate for re-election to the school committee. Welcome, Dawn.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much for having me.
So why don't you just tell us briefly about yourself and your family, or a fun fact, or whatever.
Okay, sure. I've been living here in Halston since 2002. I'm an attorney. I practice in Mass, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, state and federal courts. I do litigation. 5 children. So fun fact, I have triplets. Another fun fact, my husband is the youngest of 8. So we have, we ourselves have 5 children.
Which is unusual today.
Yes. So
triplets. That must have been quite the challenge.
Yes, it was busy, and those were in our, we first moved to Halston in 2002, and we bought an old antique colonial in Mudville. My husband renovated it, and then we quickly outgrew it once we had our 5 children. So now we live over near Outpost Farm on Prentice.
Wow. Okay. Triplets, I would love to learn. I would love to hear what that was all about, but never mind. We can't do that today. So why did you choose to run for this particular office? Although with 5 kids, I think I have a clue. But anyway.
And that's exactly it. With 5 children enrolled in the Halston school system, and a commitment to want to volunteer and be part of something. I've absolutely loved our time here within this community, and what drew us to Halston was the strong school system, and having children enrolled here, we wanted to be part of solutions. We wanted to be part of this. So I absolutely knew that I wanted to have a run for town election, be part of this, and
school committee seemed like a natural.
Yes, and that was so I'm finishing up my first 3 years. I've learned a ton, and as you can imagine, it was very different in May of 2019 when I first ran.
Yeah, you did hit a challenging period of time. You really did. Great learning curve, but unfortunately some of it's stuff you'll hopefully never have to use again.
Yes.
Anyway, so please describe the skills and experience that you bring specifically to this. Obviously, as an attorney, you bring certain skills.
Yes. So, having been here in town for over 20 years and being part of town meeting, and building community, whether it was working with Girl Scouts or working through St. Mary's or I'm on the board for Halston Youth Soccer and Halston Youth Lacrosse. We've developed, I've developed relationships with people in town. I like to collaborate and listen and be part of different organizations. And I think in terms of my skill set, as an attorney, I do mediations, depositions, arbitrations, and bring cases to trial. I think that, I know how to work for a compromise solution. I know how to listen, find common ground, and I certainly know how to advocate for a position. And I think that's, one of the things that drew me to being part of school committee is whether it is a policy that we wanted to develop or being part of this year budget subcommittee and advocating for the schools and working collaboratively with administration to look forward in terms of our plans for the future, short and long-term goals, and addressing some of the problems that we've seen in the last few years.
Okay. So there are always issues. We don't have enough money to solve them. But at any rate, so what are the 2 biggest issues facing the schools in the next 3 years? And aside from the money, okay, just we'll pretend we have all of it.
And of course, that is always an issue because I would say our most pressing concerns are those concerns arising out of the pandemic. The learning loss, also the social, emotional, behavioral, mental health issues that we've seen rising. I mean, you see the cover of New York Times today talking about the mental health crisis among teens. You saw about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services recommended screening for anxiety for all children ages 8 and up, because we've seen a tremendous rise in anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation in children and teens arising out of the pandemic. Not just that, but also the learning loss, because we want our schools to be a place of academic excellence. We want to build community. But I think, you know, across the nation, we've also seen some behavioral and mental health concerns in this past year.
So is there anything specific that you think we should be doing to address those?
A lot of the things we are doing, and they're going to take some time. We have been in a real period of change here in Halston. I mean, as you know, we had our longtime superintendent and had departed, and we have a new superintendent, a new assistant superintendent of curriculum. We've had a lot of change here. And they have been working on a 5-year new strategic plan. And, you know, we'll be talking more about that at the May 5th meeting. But in terms of addressing many of those concerns, we have seen, you know, as to behavioral concerns and some of the issues that have arisen in the school. The Anti-Defamation League came in and had worked at both the high school and the middle school level. We brought on a director of SEL this year to address many of those needs, whether it's curriculum-based, professional development. I mean, these are all areas that are going to be ongoing issues that they'll be working on for the next several years.
Yeah, unfortunately, they're not quick and fast solutions.
No.
So is there anything that we need to do better for mainstream kids, the average kid who maybe doesn't want to go to college, or if he or she does want to go to college, maybe to postpone it for a couple of years or whatever? Are they getting the education that they need?
It's a great question. I mean, we want to develop students that are passionate about learning, lifelong learners, that are resilient, that are independent, critical thinkers, and that's at all levels. I mean, we want academic excellence and we want students to be thinking about their future, but we are doing a tremendous amount. In fact, that's one of the things I think, you know, that you see the difference between the public and private sector is we often don't market all of the accomplishments that our school does have. And until you have students at each of the schools, you don't always know what they offer. But between the sports, the clubs, and the breadth of the curriculum that we offer at the high school level, I do think we prepare our students for the future. In addition, I'm glad that we have other options for students. We have Norfolk Aggie, we have Keefe Tech. There are things like that available. I mean, you've probably seen just outside this building the tiny house that students have been working on now for years, robotics clubs. Just in this last 3 years, school committee had approved, and we are talented administrators, teachers, and staff had brought forth a computer science endorsement that students can graduate Halston High School with. They also brought forth a global citizens, and I'm going to get the word wrong, it's neither endorsement nor program, but it is also something that a student can graduate with. And it includes a project. We've seen more volunteer work coming out of our students, including a one-term class that the students can take where they put together their own volunteer project.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I do think that it's difficult to know what's going on if you don't have somebody in the institution. Now, I have a high schooler, but she goes to Norfolk Aggie. Putting in a little plug for Norfolk Aggie.
and that's one of those things that I think we have seen some improvement on in the last 2 years, and that we still have more room to improve. And interestingly, communication is, I think, going to be part of that 5-year plan, and they'll start to work on that. But what I've seen a tremendous amount of improvement where our superintendent now does an end-of-week update out to the schools with various links. But I agree, if you're not within the school system, it's often hard to keep up on all of those.
Yeah, that's. I think it's actually a critical component, because as the town shifts demography, not everybody has kids. You know, you've got a smaller school population than we used to. And so you've got a lot of households that don't have any children, or their children have grown. And you need our support, ours meaning someone that doesn't have anybody in this particular, at this particular time. So it's really smart for the schools to do that outreach and
Yes.
make sure that everybody knows what's going on. Obviously, they're not going to know to the extent that the parents are, but anyway. So this question is really about how you think about things. So when you're faced with a choice between two very compelling needs, and there are often more than two compelling needs to deal with, how do you make your decisions? I'm just trying to think, figure out how you think about it. What do you need to know beforehand, and how do you process that?
Absolutely. Compromise, collaboration, reliance on the expertise of our experienced administrative staff, educators, staff, surveys, data, asking a lot of questions. I think community feedback. I mean, I think you saw that within the process of within a short time frame, having to reach out and hire a new superintendent, right? Within our small group that did first interviews and reviewed applications, and then moving on to when we did the more public interviews, we asked for community feedback, and we went through all of those emails. I mean, I think when we've seen other issues arise, always encouraging some level of survey from the community. Now, obviously, the decisions then take a bit more time, but I think it's an important part of all of this is having that community feedback, and also, reaching out and discussing these issues, so that people understand some of the hows and whys behind the dilemmas that we face.
Well, that's sort of a segue into, the other conversation
Yes.
about the school opening times.
Yes.
And that was one that, there was pushback. There was a lot of engagement. There really was a lot of engagement. But then when it went one way or the other, it got a lot of pushback. And I don't want to go over how you got to the decision or the decision itself, but what do you think is the best way to respond to strong opposition, which you will get from, at times, and how do you come to a meeting of the minds?
Yes, and it was almost trial by fire, right? I came on at the end of May 2019, shortly after the board had made that decision, or the committee made the decision, and within weeks, we started receiving emails of concerned parents catching up on what had transpired and how this would impact them. And the rollout, the choice of the committee when it was first voted on was that it would be implemented in the fall of 2020, and that would allow for some time to help with childcare needs and this big shift, this change. In response to the growing concern, the emails and the concerned parents reaching out, I was absolutely in favor of a public forum, which we then had in October of 2019, bringing in one of the sleep experts who had written various articles on this, and also coming in and listening to people's concerns and questions and trying to address sort of how this had developed and what we could do and why we couldn't change things in certain ways, because there's just a lot of information on all of this, right, in terms of what the impediments were with transportation, safety concerns, the buses, how our buses work, how many buses, how we could get everyone shifted through town. So I think that was an important part, which was the public forum. So people could be heard, we could hear them, we could try and help them to understand what some of the impediments were on this issue. I think I was also in favor in January of 2020 for the transportation or traffic study that we were going to have, and then the pandemic came, and things changed drastically. And here we are. I mean, it's been almost 3 years now since this was voted on. There was a survey of parents and. So there's a survey of parents that had occurred that we're going to, at this upcoming meeting this Thursday, talk about some of the data on that. I mean, it's been 3 years, and there's still concerns and problems with this. And so I think it needs to be, I think we need to revisit this and see if there's ways that we can mitigate it. And we even addressed this at a budget subcommittee earlier this week in terms of what would we need to do in order to make any additional changes, and what would be the costs associated with it. Just something as simple as if you put Miller and Placentino on the same bus time, how many buses would you then increase to, right? And what would the cost be to that? And is there any cost savings from going from 6 routes down to 4 routes, right? Having 2 additional schools go at the same time, or would we see an increased cost? We know there's a nationwide shortage of bus drivers. Is there an impediment to getting additional buses? And then what other factors limit it, such as the fact that right now we have unified arts or paras that might be used between both buildings. We've had substitute shortages. There's a lot of different, in addition to the traffic that we all enjoy that occurs downtown, and whether trying to get 1,000 kids on and off a bus at the same time, the safety concerns that could be related to that. What I guess I would say is we made a substantial change 3 years ago. And by making that change, instead of having 3 grades starting at 7:30, instead of having 7 grades starting at 7:30 a.m., we moved to 3. But we're still getting feedback about those 3 grades and the impact on families. And so it's not, I am not adverse to continuing to look at this, to look at solutions. And if the solutions have costs, we need to know what those are, and communicate to families and express to the community, where we could go with this. So,
yeah, nothing is simple.
No,
that's for sure. So, the past few years have been exceptionally challenging. It's an understatement, don't you like it? So, speaking for yourself and not for the committee as a whole, is there anything that you'd like to go back on and do as a do-over? Like, oh boy, I really wish we hadn't,
Yes, that's tough. We have faced a multitude of difficult decisions from coming on just as school start time change had been made, and learning about ways we could improve our communication with the community, and to the close of our schools and remote learning, to contract issues, departure of our student services director and superintendent, and then a new assistant superintendent of curriculum. There's no specific votes that I've taken that I would, in the last 3 years, go back and flip. I would not. Some of them were certainly difficult. Some of them were the result of compromise, but they were often, and maybe how I felt initially on an issue was not how I ended up voting, but because, of the time you take, listening to the other 6 on the committee and understanding where we need, and administration, and in investigating certain issues, sometimes my initial response on an issue wasn't where I ended up voting, I was the new person on the committee initially 3 years ago, and I've learned a lot.
And it's always a steep learning curve, and at schools in particular. So, given your sphere of influence, the leadership role that you now play in the community and seek to continue to play, are there policies and practices that need to be examined to improve equity, inclusion, diversity, and so forth?
Yes, and I've been, part of the school committee that voted or supported on the budget to bring on a full-time director of social, emotional learning, and equity. In addition, we've the current superintendent has talked about having an equity audit performed in this next year. And I know that was a big component of the strategic plan that we'll learn more about, or the community will learn more about on May 5th. We've seen professional development to enhance awareness of issues regarding equity and inclusion. This year with, we've seen the Anti-Defamation League come in and provide learning support at both the middle school and the high school. So it's absolutely an area that I am supportive of, and we've been lucky enough to have groups like Diverse Holliston that have worked with school committee. So yes, it is. We have a lot more work to do. But
Yeah, but you feel comfortable that we're trying?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the point in which it becomes your opportunity to do your 2-minute pitch of why folks should vote for you for the school committee.
Okay, well, I've been lucky enough to be part of the committee during a difficult time, and I'm really looking forward to hopefully the next 3 years being a bit more normal. I've served on policy, superintendent evaluation, communications, budget subcommittee. I've learned a lot in my last 3 years. Hours of training online and in person, attending the Mass School Committee Association seminars, and working collaboratively with our administration to solve many of these challenging issues that we've faced in the last 3 years. Unprecedented, right? I mean, I was lucky enough to be part of the hiring groups of both the current superintendent and other administrators. There's a lot of work that I'd like to see finished, and I'd like to take my last 3 years and the experience I've gained in those last 3 years, and looking forward to hopefully some more normal times, continue to work with our schools.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. All right. So Dawn Neborski, candidate for school committee. All right.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you for watching Just Thinking. You've done your homework, so please remember to vote on May 24th. It's important for you, your family, and the community. Thank you.